Title of my message this morning is The Power of the Prophetic Message. The power of the prophetic message. So what is a prophet? Sometimes folks think of a prophet like Nostradamus or somebody like that, a fortune teller, but that's a secondary meaning. It's not what we really mean when we look at prophets of old. What is a prophet? Here's some definitions that I got off the internet. First, a prophet who speaks by prophet is a person who speaks by divine inspiration, or as the interpreter through whom the will of a God is expressed. That's from freedictionary.com. That's what they say a prophet is. Traditionally, prophets are regarded as having a role in society that promotes change due to their messages and actions, which can convey the displeasure of God for the behavior of a people. From Wikipedia. And then a more modern definition of prophet is someone who spreads God's truths. These can be revealed in a number of ways, not only visions. So these are three of the definitions I found online for prophets. I wasn't terribly satisfied with any of them, so I have James' definitions. James' definitions. One who is willing to speak the hard truth necessary for the good of the world, even when it is unpopular or uncomfortable. One who encourages others to make the changes needed to heal and nurture themselves and our world. One who is willing to walk the walk and talk the talk. Those are my definitions. So we're going to look back now and have a little bit of a history lesson about some prophets and look at the kinds of things they did. If we look back to our Judeo-Christian heritage, one of the earliest writings about a prophet was about this guy. You know him as Moses. And if you remember, Moses goes up. He sees the bush that seems to be burning to him, and he hears God giving him a message. And that message is, "Go down, Moses, way down to Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go." Well, that may not be exactly what God said, but that's the way I learned it in the Baptist church. So here he is again. He did that. He went by and picked up his brother Aaron. And they went down, and you remember this scene from the movie. There's Charlton Heston and Yul Brynner. And he's telling him this, you got to let people go or all these bad things are going to happen. And you know the story because you probably saw. How many of you saw the movie? All right. How many of you read the book? It's the Bible. Okay. So anyway, then they finally did get to go. And here's another example of Moses being a prophet. He goes up to the mountaintop and he hears what he believes that God wants them to do, wants the covenants he wants them to have, the rules that he wants them to have. Check it out. And so he says, so here are the things. He brings back down the law and he delivers the law to the people. The law to the people. So this is also a form of being a prophet. I've gotten the message and now I'm giving it to you. You may not like it, but here it is. There were many Hebrew prophets, and if you did read the book, you know about some of these. There was Elijah, Elisha, Hosea, Amos, and others. They were all calling the people back to what they contended with true and right. And also they would go straight sometimes. They would go up to the leader, even though it meant harming themselves, and they would point their finger at that leader as well. So calling the people and calling the leaders, telling them what they believed was true and right, and warning them of the consequences. That's what these old folks did back then. Now here we have Jesus. Jesus' followers do not normally refer to him as a prophet. But if you go by my definitions, Jesus certainly was a prophet as well. And of course, the holy prophet for the Muslims, who they do call the prophet, in fact they say this is the holy prophet, did the same thing, said, I have received these divine messages. I'm sharing them with the people. And you all notice that I did what they asked, and I do not really have the prophet pictured. It's just a little white outline there. I don't want to get us in any trouble here. So I'm doing the right thing. What about Eastern religions? Do Eastern religions, do they have prophets? Well, they may not call their leaders prophets, but they probably would be prophets by my definition. We could go on and on and on through the church times, through other religions, on and on, through the Reformation, but we don't have time today. So I'm going to take you all through a time. There we go. We just skipped over a bunch of them, because now I'm going to come up to the Unitarian and Universalist prophets, because after all, you are sitting in a Unitarian Universalist congregation. So here's some of those folks. Unitarian Universalists and Unitarian Universalist prophets. One of the early ones was Michael Servetus. Michael Servetus, he wrote on the eras of the Trinity. Now, he got a lot of people mad in the Catholic Church when he wrote, this. And so he had to hide out. And when he hid out, he took on different names and different careers. He even became a physician for a while, and actually came up with some things that were noted very early in the time, very important, about how the lungs work with the heart. He did some good things like that. But he also kept on writing too, but kept on hiding out. And then finally they figured out who he was. And John Calvin got very upset. Of course, he was Protestant. Not only the Catholics were doing these things, the Protestants were upset too, that, okay, now we pulled away from the Catholic Church, but we still want you to think like we think. And you're going too far. You're just, moving beyond what we think. So Michael Servetus was burned at the stake, along with what they thought was all his books, but they later did find some. Francis David, he was the court preacher in Transylvania. He convinced their king that Unitarianism was the true way to think, not the Trinitarianism, but Unitarianism. And actually, this king, King Sigismund, is the only one we can claim as a Unitarian king. He's the only one we got in Transylvania. They also issued the Edict of Torah, which said in Transylvania that, okay, we're going to be a place that we're going to be tolerant. You can worship, you can be Catholic, you can be Protestant, you can be Unitarian, you can be Islam, you can worship some of the early earth-centered pagan religions. You can feel free to do that in Transylvania, right? He also is credited with, and some people say we didn't really say that, but certainly his writings undergird this. We need not think alike to love alike. So we still put him as that. We need not think alike to love alike. We still lift that up a lot, even in this congregation, because we do disagree on things. But we say, hey, we do not need to think alike to love alike. Another prophet was Joseph Priestley. Now, you may remember, say, Joseph Priestley, I know that, because you learned it in school, because he was a scientist, and he was this guy that discovered oxygen. So he was a scientist, he had laboratories in England, but he was also a Unitarian minister, and that's what got him in trouble. So they got all upset with him. They ended up burning down his labs and running him out of England. He came to Philadelphia, and he started a couple of Unitarian churches there. But that is not how Unitarianism got started in America. That was just a couple of little churches. Not how. You can still go up there, though, and see his home, see some of his scientific equipment in the Philadelphia area. Another early prophet of ours is John Murray. In fact, we call him the father of Universalism. He came over and preached all around the New England area, and what he was preaching is, there is no hell. There is no hell. Everybody's going to be saved and go to heaven. There is no hell. Now, you think that would be very popular. That sounds good, but a lot of people did not like him saying that. No, not at all. But that was his message. Another Unitarian person was William Ellery Channing. Now, the Unitarians actually evolved from the Puritans. The Puritans were over here, Church of the Standing Order. You had the Puritans. Some of them became more liberal because, the Enlightenment was going on. Many of them were going to Harvard, the ministers. That was a unit at that time. That was a Congregationalist seminary, became a Unitarian seminary for a while. That was the place those folks went. The folks that leaned more toward liberal ideas, they began having disagreements, and the folks that leaned toward conservative ideas, had this revival and said, we got to get back to the basics. If you oppose the revival, they started teasing them and calling them Unitarian. That was sort of a put down. Y'all are just a bunch of Unitarians, like the people over in Europe. You're just Unitarians. So William Ellery Channing decided to own it. And he preached a sermon called Unitarian Christianity and said, yes, we are Unitarians. He owned it, and they began to call themselves Unitarians. Now, Hosea Ballou was another early prophet. He was a Universalist. Hosea Ballou preached Universalism. He rejected the Trinitarian doctrine, so in a way he was Unitarian too. He founded the Universalist magazine, later called The Trumpet. So he was out there doing a lot of good things too. Now the interesting thing is, William Ellery Channing, a Unitarian, Hosea Ballou, Universalist, they were both prophetic, had prophetic messages, both very strong men. I read both their readings. They were writing about similar kinds of things. They both lived in Boston at the same time. They never met each other. Never met each other. And the reason, folks, was class. Back at that time, especially in places like Boston, classism was such a huge thing that you just didn't associate. The Unitarians were the ones that were educated, many of the ministers at Harvard. The Universalists, in fact, Hosea Ballou only had a second-grade education. He's self-educated. So those reasons kept them apart. Thankfully, it didn't last because as time went forward, they began to see each other at the same kinds of things and decided, hey, really, we are a lot alike. But initially, that was the problem, was class. Here's another person that wasn't a minister, but I consider him a prophet, Henry David Thoreau, because the things that he wrote about were things that he felt inspired about, and he felt were true, and he needed to lift these things up, so I would call him a prophet. Another prophet was Theodore Parker. Now, Theodore Parker was a Unitarian minister, although some Unitarians began to disown him a little bit because he was too radical, they thought, way out there. Well, for one thing, he was a transcendentalist, so he hung out with people like Emerson and Thoreau and the Alcotts and Margaret Fuller and that bunch. That's okay, so the other thing, he was a strong abolitionist. Now, not so strong that he was stronger than most. Most people would go to meetings and speak out. But he actually hid slaves in his home, and he had a gun in his desk that he would say that it was there for him to use in case somebody tried to come and tried to take the slaves that he was hiding out. So he was pretty radical. Also, he considered himself a Christian, but he was a very radical Christian, and others around him were saying, you are not really a Christian. You can call yourself that, but we don't consider you that. He preached, I'll tell you this first. He inspired MLK and others, though, with his writings. You know that saying that we often attribute to MLK that says, the arc of the universe, the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. He got that from Theodore Parker. That's okay. I'm glad for MLK to have it. He reworded it, yes, take it on, because it's a good saying, but it came from Theodore Parker. In fact, MLK, when he was in Boston, attended Unitarian churches, read a lot of their works. Coretta Scott King said they really liked the Unitarians, never considered becoming one, though, because that he never could have done what he needed to do in something like the Unitarian denomination, of course. But he did come, and they were heavily influenced by Unitarians and Universalists. And then he also, tell you one thing, he wrote this sermon called A Discourse on the Transient and the Permanent in Christianity. This sermon became very famous, popular and unpopular because of what it said. He said in this sermon that some things are transient and some things are permanent. And he said, most of the stuff that you read about in the Bible may or may not be any truth to it. Even what Jesus' words, he didn't write them himself. These are transient things. The ideas here and what's down are transient things. Then in Christianity, what's permanent, it's what underlies it. The love for folks, the respect for folks, those kinds are the permanent teachings. The others are transient, which may or may not hold water. They're not the really important things. It's what underlies it. And that's what got people upset with him too. Susan B. Anthony, I consider a prophet. She was not a minister, but she was certainly a prophet. And she went around and shared with folks, traveled widely, sharing and prophesying the truth to folks about women's rights and other things as well. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was someone that worked with her, but Elizabeth Cady Stanton had children, so a lot of the stuff, you may not realize, that Susan B. Anthony was going around sharing with folks was written by Elizabeth Cady Stanton. They worked in partnership with it. So I consider Susan B. Anthony a prophet, and not only a prophet, she's a Unitarian prophet. Now, you may say, I read she was a Quaker. Yes, she was. But she joined a Unitarian congregation, and we know that because we have her signature on the book that one of our folks is going to sign, not our book, but the book of one of the other churches. So she also was a Unitarian as well as a Quaker. She was raised a Quaker, but did become a Unitarian. Another woman that I consider a prophet is Julia Ward Howe. Now, Julia Ward Howe, you may have heard of as the person that composed the lyrics for the Battle Hymn of the Republic. That's how she is best known. But that's not what I love mostly about her. If you read her works, you will come to love. This was a very early feminist, and wow, she went around also writing and telling what she perceived to be the truth. Got her in a lot of trouble too. Almost got me in trouble. I preached this here, I did this Jane and Julia back when the movie Julie and Julia was popular. You remember that? So I did a sermon, Jane and Julia, about me and Julia Ward Howe. I did it here, had my little hat on when I was Julia Ward Howe, took it off. I went down to Brunswick and did it. I wasn't their minister then, but they had invited me to come when maybe their minister was out. So when I went back and I was interviewing for the job to actually be their halftime minister, they said, well, we have to watch out about those sermons like you did about Jane and Julia. I said, you mean because of the creativity thing, the drama, putting on the hat and stuff like that? They said, oh, no, because it was just too feminist for some folks. I said, well, I hate to tell you this, but you can get more of that. So, you get me, you're going to get more of that. And they accept me now, So I don't know whether I'll do Jane and Julia again, but I may pull it back out. She's a prophet. Now, this is James Luther Adams, a Unitarian Universalist prophet. He was the most influential UU theologian in the 20th century. So he taught at the seminary that I went to before I was at Meadville Lombard. He also taught at Harvard. He influenced many, many people, and he had some wonderful things to share with us. Here's some of the quotes he had. People can die from the hardening of categories. I like that one. People can die from the hardening of categories. He kind of borrowed on Socrates and changed a little bit. He said, unexamined faith is not worth having. And unexamined faith is not worth having. But the reason I want to share with you about him today is because of what he shared about the prophethood of all believers. Now, some of you may have known that during the Protestant Reformation, one of the big ideas was that no longer did you have to have a priest to read the Bible and tell you what it meant, but that we could have the priesthood of all believers. The priesthood of all believers. That you should be able to read it yourself. By then we had the printing press, so we're having copies made. People got the copies, and the idea is you could have the priesthood of all believers. Well, James Luther Adams said not only should we have the priesthood of all believers, but there should be the prophethood of all believers. And by believers, what I'm meaning to tell you today is if you believe that we can make a difference if we work hard enough in the world and do good things. You're a believer in humanity and the fact that we can make a difference, you are my kind of believer. And he said we should have the prophethood of all believers. Now, I would like to get him to come and share that with you himself today, a little bit about it, but he is dead. So I'm going to try to channel him. I have a quote I'm going to read. You can look at him. This comes from him. We see the prophet as one who stands at the edge of a community's experience and tradition, under the great taskmaker's eye, viewing human life from a piercing perspective and bringing an imperative sense of the perennial and an inescapable struggle of good against evil, of justice against injustice. The prophet shakes us out of our pride and calls for a change of heart and mind and action. With fear and trembling, the prophet announces crisis and demands ethical decision here and now. But we fall short of understanding the full nature of prophecy and the prophetic task of the church if we think of the prophets as merely critics dealing with religious and ethical generalities. A church that does not concern itself with the struggle in history for human decency and justice. A church that does not show concern for the shape of things to come. A church that does not attempt to interpret the signs of the times is not a prophetic church. The prophetic liberal church is the church in which persons think and work together to interpret the signs of the times in the light of their faith, to make explicit through discussion the epochal thinking that the times demand. The prophetic liberal church is the church in which all members share the common responsibility to attempt to foresee the consequences of human behavior, both individual and institutional, with the intention of making history in place of merely being pushed around by it. Only through prophetism of all believers can we together foresee doom and mend our common ways. James Luther Adams. Well, what's happened though is that we and others have been living in our own bubbles. We live in our bubbles. We look at our social media, which has algorithms set up that we only see the stuff that our other friends see and post. We watch our news stations. Other people watch their news stations. And we all live in these bubbles, and we think maybe this is the way the world is. Maybe this is the way people think. But things happen sometimes. Things happen, and the bubble bursts. I'm going to share something with you from the Soul Matters UU Worship Consortium, which I go to for some information about this kind of thing. And here's what they say. And so, if Election Day was about realizing we were asleep in a bubble, the question on Inauguration Day becomes, are we ready to wake up? And let's be clear, this is not a politically partisan thing. Liberals and conservatives have done a ton of waking up to do. One employed Michigan factory worker was quoted after the election saying, "I vote Republican because I won't vote for anyone who doesn't see and respect me." On the other side of the political fence, Black, Latino, Muslim, and LGBT families are struggling with the real fear about what's been unleashed and what may be unleashed against them. And they are wondering if this country will wake up to and take their fear seriously. Well, what about it? What will you do? What will you do? What should this congregation here in Statesboro do? What should your minister do? I'll tell you what I was doing last weekend. I went to Washington and I marched, and I marched, and I marched. And many marched here too. There are many protesting now. Not that that's enough. But there are times we must resist. As MLK said, there are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted. So we march, then we organize, and then we act. Then we act. Here's a modern day prophet. Have you heard him? Go on YouTube and listen to him. William Barber, Reverend William Barber from North Carolina. This is a modern day prophet. He will tell you like it is. Greg and I were fortunate that when we went to General Assembly this past June, we were able to hear him as he shared with us in a very prophetic way. And one of the things he told us was, stay woke. Stay woke. Stay woke. Stay woke. We can't let up. Stay woke. Because the truth is marching on. Rise in body and spirit and sing it with me. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. and sing out.